Did you know 1 in 5 married couples admit to infidelity? But what happens when the person betrayed is the one who swore to uphold the law? Tonight, we dive into the twisted case of a small-town sheriff, his wife's hidden affair, and a used condom that blew their marriage apart. Welcome to Vic's True Crime Stories, where secrets never stay buried. Buckle up, this one's personal. Sheriff Leonard Gray was the kind of man people trusted without question. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that carried the weight of authority and eyes that missed nothing. For 17 years, he kept the streets of Sweetwater County safe, the kind of sheriff who knew every face, every name, every secret, except the one hiding in his own home. That morning began like any other. The Texas sun stretched its golden fingers across the quiet town, painting the sky in shades of fire. Leonard rose before dawn, the way he always did, his routine as steady as the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, its bitter scent filling the air, while he dressed in the dim light of the bedroom. He needed his spare key, the one for the evidence locker, the one he kept tucked away in his dresser for emergencies. But when his fingers brushed against the polished wood of the drawer, when he pushed aside neatly folded shirts and old receipts, the key wasn't there. A frown creased his brow. He wasn't a man who misplaced things. Order was his religion, discipline his creed. He checked again. Nothing. Then a thought. Maybe Carol had moved it. Maybe it had gotten mixed in with her things. The walk-in closet was her domain, a space of soft fabrics and faint perfume. His side was all pressed uniforms and polished boots. Hers, a cascade of colors, scarves draped like whispers over hangers. He reached for the small wooden box on the top shelf, the one where they kept odds and ends, spare change, forgotten trinkets, loose keys. But as he lifted it, a shoebox tipped over, spilling its contents onto the floor. He crouched to gather the scattered items. A pair of gloves, a stack of old birthday cards, a faded photograph of a beach vacation. And then, beneath a folded sweater, something else. A small, crumpled square of plastic. At first, his mind didn't register what it was. Then, slowly, the truth settled over him like a shroud. A condom wrapper, torn open, used. The air left his lungs. They hadn't used condoms in years, not since Carol's surgery. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, the plastic slick between his fingertips. And beside it, wrapped in a tissue as if someone had tried and failed to hide it, was the condom itself. For a long moment, Leonard didn't move. The world narrowed to that single, damning object in his palm. His pulse roared in his ears, a drumbeat of disbelief. Then footsteps behind him. Carol stood in the doorway, her dark curls mussed from sleep, her silk robe clinging to her frame. She took one look at his face, at what he held, and her breath hitched. The color drained from her cheeks. "Leonard," she whispered. He didn't shout, didn't rage. His voice was low, dangerous. "Boo!" She swallowed hard. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," he said, his jaw clenched so tight the words came out like gravel. Her silence was worse than any confession. And then the name, the one he dreaded, the one that made his blood turn to ice. Brian Stevens, their neighbor, the man who'd sat at their dinner table, who'd laughed with them over beers on the porch, who'd clapped Leonard on the back like a friend. The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. The late nights Carol claimed she was working. The sudden interest in fitness, the new perfume. The way Brian's eyes had lingered on her a second too long at the 4th of July barbecue. Leonard's hands curled into fists. The condom wrapper crumpled in his grip. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Leonard and Carol Gray were the golden couple of Sweetwater County. High school sweethearts who held hands in the hallways, prom king and queen, married straight out of graduation. For 12 years, they were the couple people pointed to and said, that's what love should look like. The sheriff and his beautiful wife, hosting summer barbecues, attending church every Sunday, their laughter ringing through the neighborhood like wind chimes on a breezy afternoon. But houses have walls for a reason. Behind closed doors, in the quiet hours when the world wasn't watching, their marriage had been crumbling for years. Leonard lived and breathed his job. The late nights, chasing leads, The early mornings at crime scenes, the endless paperwork that kept him at his desk until the streetlights flickered on. He wore his dedication like a badge of honor, never realizing each missed anniversary, each forgotten birthday, was another crack in the foundation of their life together. Carol tried. Oh, how she tried. She packed his lunches with little love notes tucked between the sandwiches. She waited up nights with cold dinners growing stale on the table. She smiled at community events when he showed up late, making excuses about duty calls that everyone politely accepted. But the loneliness ate at her, a slow poison working its way through her veins. Then came Brian Stevens, the new neighbor with the easy smile and the too perfect hair. A former defense attorney from Dallas who moved into the white colonial across the street, all charm and polished shoes. He brought over a bottle of wine as a housewarming gift, his fingers brushing Carol's just a second too long when she took it. He had a way of looking at her that made her feel seen in a way Leonard hadn't made her feel in years. At first, it was harmless. A chat over the fence while she gardened. A chance meeting at the grocery store where he just happened to need the same ingredients. Then the compliment started, not just about her appearance, but about her mind, her laugh, the way she organized neighborhood fundraisers. Little doses of attention that filled the hollow spaces Leonard's absence had created. The town noticed. Oh yes, they noticed. Brian Stevens had a reputation that followed him like cologne, something expensive that lingered long after he'd left the room. The way he'd lean too close to married women at the country club, the sly winks he'd give over cocktails, the trail of broken hearts he'd left in Dallas. But Carol? Sweet, loyal Carol? No one imagined she'd ever. Until she did. It started with coffee, then lunch, then working late. At the same time, Brian just happened to be at the downtown bistro. The first time she kissed him, she cried all the way home. The second time, she didn't cry at all. By the third time, she'd stopped counting. And all the while, Leonard remained oblivious, buried in case files and duty rosters, never noticing how Carol's perfume changed, how she started wearing the emerald earrings Brian complimented, how she'd flinch when Leonard touched her in bed. The cruelest irony? Leonard's own childhood haunted him like a ghost he couldn't outrun. His mother Barbara had walked out when he was 8 years old, leaving nothing but a note on the kitchen table and the scent of another man's cologne on her pillow. His father James, a deputy himself, had buried his grief in whiskey and night shifts, leaving young Leonard to piece together what remained of their broken family. The morning Leonard Gray's life shattered began like any other. The Texas sun poured through the bedroom curtains, painting stripes of gold across the carpet as he dressed for another day of keeping Sweetwater County safe. His fingers moved automatically, buttoning the crisp uniform shirt, fastening the badge that weighed heavier than its metal suggested, checking his holster. Routine, comfort, control. Then came the missing key, that small silver key to the evidence locker. The one he kept tucked in his dresser beneath folded handkerchiefs and old service pins was gone. Leonard frowned. He wasn't a man who misplaced things. His life ran with the precision of a military operation, every item in its place, every movement calculated. He searched again, emptying the drawer completely, his movements growing sharper with each passing second. Perhaps Carol had moved it. The walk-in closet smelled of lavender and leather, that familiar blend of their shared life. His side stood rigid, pressed uniforms, polished boots lined up like soldiers. Hers flowed in waves of color, silk blouses whispering against each other, summer dresses frozen in perpetual readiness. The wooden box on her top shelf held spare keys, forgotten trinkets, the detritus of a marriage. As he reached for it, his elbow caught a shoebox. The contents spilled across the floor in silent accusation. Leonard knelt, gathering scattered photographs, a pair of gloves still holding the shape of Carol's hands. Then his fingers brushed something else, something that didn't belong. The crinkle of plastic registered before his mind processed what he held. A condom wrapper, torn open, empty. Time stopped. They hadn't used condoms since the hysterectomy 3 years ago. The wrapper sat in his palm like a live grenade, its meaning detonating through him in slow motion. Then he saw the tissue beside it, carefully folded, hiding its contents like a shameful secret. He didn't need to unwrap it. He knew. Footsteps padded softly behind him. Carol stood in the doorway, her sleep-tousled hair framing a face gone pale. Her eyes locked onto what he held, and in that instant, 12 years of marriage dissolved into silence. Who? The word scraped from Leonard's throat like broken glass. Carol's lips trembled. It's not. Who? The roar shook the room, rattling the perfume bottles on her dresser. Tears spilled down Carol's cheeks, but they didn't soften him. Not this time. Brian, she whispered. Brian Stevens, their neighbor, the man who'd borrowed tools from their garage, who'd shared their Thanksgiving table last year, who'd clapped Leonard on the back with one hand while sliding the other up Carol's thigh beneath the dinner table. The confession poured out of Carol like blood from a wound. You were never home, always working, always distracted. Brian noticed me. He saw me when you stopped looking. Leonard's hands shook with the effort not to strike her. Every late night at the station, every missed anniversary, every time he'd chosen duty over her, she'd thrown it all back in his face with another man's sheets tangled around her. The front door slammed behind him as he stormed out, the morning air doing nothing to cool the fire in his veins. 50 yards. That's all that separated his house from Brian's. 50 yards of perfectly manicured lawn where children played and neighbors waved. Today, Leonard crossed it with murder in his steps. Brian answered the door in pajama bottoms, bare-chested, smelling of sleep and sex and Leonard's shampoo. His smirk died when he saw Leonard's face. Morning, Sheriff. The words dripped with false cheer. What brings you by so? Leonard's fist connected with Brian's jaw, sending him sprawling across the hardwood floor. Blood bloomed bright against his perfect teeth. She was easy prey, Leonard growled, advancing. That what you told yourself while you were in my bed? With my wife. Brian wiped his mouth, grinning through the pain. Someone had to give her what you couldn't. The gun cleared its holster before Leonard made the decision to draw. Brian's eyes widened, his bravado crumbling as he scrambled backward. You wouldn't. The gunshot cracked through the house like thunder. Brian screamed, clutching his thigh as blood seeped between his fingers. Somewhere a dog barked. A car alarm wailed. Leonard stood over him, the barrel smoking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sirens wailed in the distance. The neighbors had called 911, called his own deputies to the scene. Leonard holstered his weapon and walked out, past the gathering crowd, past their shocked whispers. His patrol car sat in the driveway, the engine still warm. He opened the door, then stopped. The badge on his chest caught the sunlight, winking at him like a cruel joke. 17 years of service. A lifetime of doing things by the book. All undone in 60 seconds of red-hot rage. Leonard unfastened the badge, letting it fall onto the driver's seat with a dull thud. The sirens grew louder as he walked away, leaving behind the life he'd built, the man he'd been, the love he'd trusted. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. And sometimes, the keepers of the law become its greatest violators. The aftermath of that single gunshot echoed through Sweetwater County like a church bell tolling at a funeral. Leonard Gray had been their sheriff for 17 years, a man who stood for justice, for order, for doing things the right way. Now he stood at the center of a storm that divided the town as cleanly as a knife through wedding cake. Some call him a hero. The old-timers at the diner nodded over their coffee cups, muttering that Stevens got what he deserved. A man who steals another man's wife ought to expect lead poisoning, they'd say, wiping egg yolk from their mustaches. The veterans at the American Legion Post raised glasses to Leonard's name, remembering how he'd helped their families, how he'd always been there when called. To them, this wasn't a crime. It was frontier justice, the kind their grandfathers would have understood. Others saw only hypocrisy. The church ladies clutched their pearls and whispered about the sanctity of marriage, conveniently forgetting which party had actually broken those vows first. The young mothers at the PDA meetings shook their heads, saying no betrayal justified violence. He swore an oath they'd remind each other while arranging bake sale items. and then he broke it just like she broke their promises. But the most interesting division cut through Leonard's own department. Deputy Wilkins, who'd worked night shifts beside Leonard for a decade, quietly packed up the sheriff's personal items from his office, leaving the badge polished to a mirror shine on top. Meanwhile, rookie Officer Martinez filed the incident report with trembling hands, wondering if this was what happened to all men who loved too hard, if devotion inevitably curdled into something darker. Carol became a ghost in her own home. She drifted from room to room, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, every ring of the telephone. The women who used to invite her to book club now crossed the street when they saw her coming. The men averted their eyes entirely, as if her shame might be contagious. She'd lost her husband, her standing, and in some ways, even her lover, because Brian Stevens, once so bold and charming, had fled town the moment he could walk again, leaving behind nothing but a for sale sign and the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. As for Leonard, he sat in a motel room on the edge of town, staring at the cracked plaster ceiling, replaying every moment that led to this. The years of missed dinners, the anniversaries spent at crime scenes, the way Carol's smile had dimmed over time, like a light bulb slowly burning out. He'd been so busy protecting the town that he'd failed to protect his own heart. And when the dam finally broke, the flood had destroyed everything in its path. The law he'd devoted his life to now regarded him as a criminal. The wife he'd loved since high school now flinched at the sound of his voice. The neighbor he'd shared beers with had nearly died by his hand. Leonard Gray, the man who could always find the right answer, now faced a question with no good solution. When justice fails, what's left but vengeance? And when vengeance exacts its price, who pays the cost? In the end, Sweetwater County would move on. New scandals would replace old ones. Another sheriff would take Leonard's place. But for those who lived through it, the story would linger in whispered conversations and knowing glances. Because the truth they all came to understand was this: some betrayals don't just break trust, they break people. And sometimes, the pieces can never be put back together. The real tragedy wasn't the affair, or even the shooting. It was watching a good man become exactly what he'd spent his life fighting against. It was realizing that love, when twisted by neglect and poisoned by betrayal, could make monsters of us all. And most of all, it was knowing that in matters of the heart, there are no clean arrests, no perfect resolutions, just broken people doing what they think they must while the world watches and wonders. What would I have done? The dust settled over Sweetwater County like a shroud, but the scars remained. Brian Stevens survived his wound, a clean shot through the thigh that left him limping but alive. When the bandages came off, so did his charming smile. No more lazy grins for the ladies at the grocery store. No more smooth talk at the neighborhood barbecues. Just a packed suitcase and a one-way ticket out of town before the whispers could follow him any further. The for sale sign went up before his stitches came out, and just like that, the man who'd played with fire vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving only scorch marks behind. Carol sat alone in a lawyer's office, signing papers that unraveled 12 years of marriage with every stroke of the pen. The house they bought together, the photos on the walls, the future they planned, all reduced to lines on legal documents. She'd traded warm nights and shared jokes for lonely mornings and sideways glances from former friends. The town that once welcomed her with open arms now treated her like a stranger, or worse, a cautionary tale. Even her reflection in the mirror seemed changed, the spark in her eyes dulled by regret and the weight of consequences. And Leonard, the sheriff star that once gleamed so proudly on his chest, now sat in a drawer at the station, collecting dust alongside other relics of the past. He walked out of the courthouse a free man, no charges filed, no handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. But freedom came at a cost higher than bail. The uniform he'd worn with pride for nearly 2 decades no longer fit, not because his body had changed, but because the man inside it had. He drove down Main Street one last time, past the diner where he'd eaten lunch every Tuesday, past the elementary school where he'd given safety talks to wide-eyed children, past the oak tree where he'd first kissed Carol all those summers ago. The town looked the same, The same storefronts, the same stoplights, the same faces going about their daily lives. But nothing would ever be the same again. They found his hat days later, resting on a fence post along Route 17, the brim tilted just so, as if waiting for its owner to return. The wind played with the dust around it, swirling tiny tornadoes of red Texas dirt that danced across the road before vanishing into nothing. A fitting metaphor, some might say, for a man who'd once stood so tall, only to disappear without a trace. No trial could have punished Leonard more than his own conscience. No jail cell could have confined him tighter than the prison of his thoughts. He'd spent his life upholding the law, only to break it when it mattered most. He'd dedicated himself to protecting others, only to fail at protecting his own heart. In the end, the story of Leonard Gray became one of those tales people tell in hushed tones, a warning wrapped in tragedy, a lesson dressed in sorrow. Because sometimes justice doesn't come from courtrooms or juries. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments when we're alone with our choices. And sometimes the harshest sentence isn't handed down by a judge, but by the mirror we face each morning. The road stretched empty before him, endless and unknown. Behind him lay everything he'd ever loved and lost. Ahead lay, well, that remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, the sheriff was gone. Only Leonard remained. And for the first time in his life, he had no idea who that man was supposed to be. So where does this leave us, dear viewers? Was Leonard Gray a hero taking a stand, or a hypocrite who became the very thing he fought against? That's the question that lingers like gun smoke in the Texas air. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Scroll down and tell me. Would you have pulled that trigger? Could you have walked away? Or would the fire of betrayal have burned through your better judgment too? The comments are open, and this debate is far from over. And if this story left you questioning how well you truly know the people closest to you, you're not alone. In fact, why not dive into another twisted tale of trust betrayed? One last thing before you go, tap that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because here at Vic's True Crime Stories, we peel back the pretty facades to show you the rot beneath. Every week, another shocking story. Every episode, another truth revealed. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Stay curious, my friends. Stay vigilant. And above all, stay safe. Because as Leonard Gray learned too late, the most dangerous crimes don't happen in dark alleys. They happen in broad daylight, behind closed doors, in the places we always thought were safe. See you next time.